Summer Camp, inspired by Braiding the Sweetgrass chapter, Sitting in a Circle, by Samantha Hardaway. As Paul looked out the car window, he could not believe that his mom was sending him to summer camp. Not just one day at camp, but one whole week. Last week, when she signed him up, she told him, "Don't worry, honey, summer camp will be fun. It'll give you a chance to reconnect with nature." He had told her, "Newsflash, Mom, I don't want to reconnect with nature. I wanted to spend my entire summer inside, where it was cool." When they pulled into the parking lot, he saw a lake, rows of cabins, a building, and kids just like him being dragged to this camp. He thought to himself, this week is going to be horrible. He dragged his feet up to the mess hall, where his mom said goodbye, and he followed Counselor Robin to Bluebird Cabin, his cabin. And Paul didn't even like birds. As he entered the cabin, there were 3 bunk beds in his room. Great. I have to share a room with 5 other people, he thought. He took time to explore his cabin before dinner call. He was shocked to realize that there were no electronics anywhere. No phones, no TV, no Xbox, nothing. He muttered aloud, "Perfect. This week just got worse." Just then, a boy walked by. His name was James, and asked, "What did you say?" Paul replied, "Nothing. I was just talking about how excited I am to be here." James said, "Really? Because my mom is forcing me to be here, to reconnect with nature." Really? My mom said the same thing. Let's just say I'm not thrilled about being here either. The 2 boys walked up to dinner together. Maybe this week won't be so bad. At least Paul isn't the only one who didn't want to be here. The first couple days dragged by slowly. It was filled with crafts, music, nature hikes, science experiments, outside, all day in the hot summer heat. They learned about the life cycle of a frog, how to build a birdhouse, songs about nature, and explored for hours. The only good thing was that he and James had a little fun joking around and hanging out during free hour. The next day, the boys were on a nature hike with Counselor Robin. They were walking in the back of the line, drowning out everything the naturalist was saying. When Counselor Robin noticed this, she pulled the boys aside and said, "Come with me." Reluctantly, the boys both followed behind. She led them to a pond where there was a canoe with 3 paddles waiting for them. Counselor Robin got in the back, and the 2 boys sat in the front. As they pushed off the bank, Counselor asked, "Are you enjoying your time here?" Unsure whether to be honest, the boys both shrugged and said, "Sure." Robin said, "Well, that doesn't sound convincing. Why don't you like it?" Paul started, "It's hot, and there's nothing to do. I wanted to spend my summer at home watching TV in the nice, cool air conditioning. You know, there are many ways to cool off in nature, like sitting in the shade, feeling a breeze in the wind, or jumping in the water. And there are tons of fun things to do and see in nature. You just have to look for them," Robin said. Just as she finished talking, they turned the corner, just in sight of a beautiful waterfall. It was so grand. You could hear the roaring waters as the waterfall hit the lake. But at the same time, it was quiet. You could hear the wind blowing, leaves rustling, and birds chirping. You could see a mama bird care for her chick. You could feel the cold breeze coming off the waterfall. Now this is cool, Paul thought. Counselor Robin said, "Jump in, cool off." "Are you sure? Just jump in the massive lake. Aren't there fish and plants in here?" James said. "Yes, jump in, cool off. You have life jackets on." And the boys jumped in the water. It was so cool and refreshing. It felt amazing. The boys swam for minutes, then got back in the canoe and headed back to camp. As Paul walked to his cabin to change clothes, he began to think to himself, "A week isn't that bad. Besides, I'm already halfway done. The waterfall was pretty cool, and Counselor Robin said we can go swimming any time." It was in that moment Paul and James decided they were going to have a fun next few days. That night, Paul and all 5 of his bunkmates stayed up late telling scary stories to one another. They laughed for hours and wanted to stay up even later than the lights out time. When he woke up in the morning, he was so excited to get started. He was awake before everybody else. He hurried up to the dining hall for breakfast, where Counselor Robin was surprised to see him up so early. But she didn't say anything. She just smiled. During the day, Paul was full of energy. He was excited to learn about nature. They spent their day learning about the water cycle and different plants they could use to create baskets. The baskets they were making would be made 100% by things found in nature. He was constantly asking questions and was so excited to get started on their final project, basket weaving. It was finally the day that they had prepared for, basket weaving day. He had stayed up late the night before practicing, so he was ready for today. James and Paul had to go into the woods and find their own supplies to create their basket. They had learned that there were so many materials and supplies they could use right outside. The two decided to gather some plants with long leaves to weave, sticks, and other plant matter. They didn't need to go to the store and spend any money. Nature already had made it for them. The two went and gathered everything they needed and headed back to camp to get started. The boys worked on their creation for hours. They wanted it to look just right. They were very careful weaving the basket together, sure not to break a leaf. After the basket was completed, they placed the final piece on the basket, a robin feather they had found. Then they headed up to the cabin to give Counselor Robin their creation. She was surprised to see the masterpiece that they had created. They handed her the basket and said, "We made this for you. You taught us how important nature is and how remarkable it can be. You really made me enjoy this week, and we owe you all our thanks." She was so surprised and touched by the boys' thankfulness. She gave them a big hug and said, "Thank you." The two left and went for an afternoon swim. Later that night, they enjoyed s'mores and a campfire with their bunkmates. There, they sang all the music they had learned that week. Tonight, they got to stay up late because today was the last day of camp. Tomorrow morning, Mom would come, and Paul was dreading it. When morning came, Paul waited till the last minute to pack up and head to the pickup area. He didn't want to leave. He was having so much fun here. Now he would have to go home and watch TV. Or does he? He thought, maybe he could go in the backyard and explore. He thought that's just what he was going to do. When he saw his mom waiting for him, he ran up to her and gave her a big hug and said, "Thanks, Mom, for sending me to summer camp. I had a really great time with my new friend James. Can I come back next year? And every year after that?" Mom smiled and said, "Of course you can." Paul was already counting down the days until he went back to summer camp. And then the summary for this book is Paul must go to summer camp for a week, and he's not very excited. He has to do activities, share a room, sit in the hot summer sun instead of being at home. However, when Paul and his new friend James go on a boat ride with Counselor Robin, everything changes, and they realize summer camp isn't so bad. And then the key words that I use for this story are waterfall, naturalist, counselor, Robin, remarkable, and thankful. The end.